Her voice cut through the cabin like a whip. "I'll ask you one last time. Move to the back, or I'll call security." It was loud enough for every single passenger to hear. Heads turned. Some frowned, others smirked, and all eyes landed on me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even blink. "I've already told you, I'm not moving." The air seemed to tighten around us. Her jaw shifted, her lips pressing into a thin smile that didn't touch her eyes. But she didn't know who she was speaking to. Not yet. Minutes earlier, I'd stepped onto the jet with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The aircraft gleamed outside, a sleek bird resting on the runway, its paint catching the afternoon sun. Inside, the cabin whispered wealth in every detail. Soft leather seating, gold accents on the fixtures, and the faint scent of something warm and expensive in the air. The passengers were already settling in, their tailored coats folded neatly over armrests, their champagne flutes resting on polished trays. I moved down the aisle at an unhurried pace, my bag rolling silently behind me. My seat was near the front, and I knew exactly where I was going. She was waiting. Lauren, the lead flight attendant, stood by the entrance, smile wide for the couple ahead of me. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond. Lovely to see you again." When it was my turn, the warmth in her eyes dimmed. The smile stayed, but it was paper thin. "Welcome aboard," she said, the words short, clipped. Then she was already turning to the next guest. I didn't react. I'd learned long ago that some people decide who you are before you've said a single word. From my seat, I could see her moving through the cabin, offering pillows to some, menus to others. Her tone shifted, light and bright for certain passengers, businesslike for the rest. But when her eyes found me again, something flickered there. She walked over, her hands clasped behind her back. "Ma'am, I think you're in the wrong section," she said, low enough at first to sound polite. "I believe this is my seat." Her voice sharpened. "This section is reserved for our elite passengers." Across the aisle, a man in a charcoal suit glanced up from his phone. 2 rows ahead, a woman in pearls leaned toward her husband to whisper. "You might want to check your passenger list," I said, steady, but not unkind. "I don't need to check anything," she replied, straightening to her full height. "I know who belongs here, and who doesn't." A soft hum of whispers began to thread through the cabin. Someone muttered, "Why doesn't she just move?" Another said, "Probably trying to sneak up here." I didn't move. I didn't even turn my head toward the voices. Have you ever been judged before someone even knew who you were? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're new here, I share more of my own stories every single week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss them. Lauren's smile was gone now. "I'm giving you one more chance," she said louder this time. "Either you move or you'll be escorted off this plane." I met her eyes and leaned back in my seat. "Call whoever you need to." She had no idea how much she'd regret that. The hum of quiet conversation filled the cabin as I settled into my seat. I slid my bag neatly under the front, smoothed the crease on my slacks, and leaned back. The leather was warm, the kind that felt molded to its owner. That was when I felt it, the sideways glances. The woman in pearls from earlier kept flicking her gaze my way, then leaning to murmur into her husband's ear. 2 rows back, a man in a blazer paused mid-sentence to take a longer look. It wasn't curiosity. It was the kind of look that tries to place you, and then decides you don't belong. I focused on fastening my seatbelt. People's opinions didn't change the buckle clicking into place. Lauren's shadow stretched across my lap before her voice reached me. "I'm going to say this again. Are you sure you're in the right seat?" My eyes lifted slowly to meet hers. "Yes." She didn't blink. "This section is exclusive." "I know," I said evenly, "and I have my boarding pass right here if you'd like to see it." Her hand didn't move toward it. "That won't be necessary," she said, though her tone made it clear it was very necessary to her. Out of the corner of my eye, the Raymonds, the older couple across the aisle, were being offered champagne. The way Lauren's smile bloomed for them was like stepping into sunshine after a cloudy morning. "Mr. Raymond, Mrs. Raymond, it's always a pleasure to have you on board," she said, placing their drinks on linen napkins. The warmth, the charm, it was all there. And then she turned back to me. That brightness vanished. "If you'd like a refreshment," she said flatly, "you can wait until I finish with the others." It was subtle, but the contrast was sharp enough for even the businessman behind me to notice. I caught his frown reflected in the polished brass trim near my seat. That's when Grace appeared. Younger, softer voice, eyes that darted between Lauren and me. She was holding a passenger manifest, her fingers twitching as if they wanted to move across the page. Lauren's tone shifted, suddenly colder. "Grace, I've already handled this. You can see to the back of the cabin." Grace hesitated. "I was just going to confirm." "I said I've handled it." Lauren cut in, the words final. Grace gave me a look, a fleeting one, but enough to tell me she'd seen this kind of thing before. She stepped away, but her shoulders had tightened. I remained where I was, hands resting loosely on my lap, eyes forward. The whispers had faded into silence now. Only the faint chime of ice in champagne glasses broke it. Lauren still stood there, waiting for something she wasn't going to get from me. "You're not going to make this difficult, are you?" "I think you've already decided it's difficult," I replied. Her lips pressed together, but she turned on her heel. The aisle between us seemed longer than before. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't have to. I knew this wasn't over. Lauren didn't wait long before returning. This time, she didn't bother lowering her voice. "I'm going to make this very clear," she announced, her tone sharp enough to slice through the polite quiet of the cabin. "You're in the wrong section." Heads turned again. Even the clink of glassware stopped. The socialite in pearls leaned toward her husband, lips curling. "Told you." "She probably just wandered up here," she said, loud enough to travel 2 rows. I kept my gaze on Lauren. "You might want to be certain before you keep saying that," I replied. My voice was steady, unhurried, a tone that tended to unsettle people who expect you to flinch. Lauren's eyes narrowed. "I don't need to check anything. I know exactly who has seats here." Grace appeared again from the rear of the cabin, the manifest in her hands. "If I could just confirm." "You don't need to confirm," Lauren snapped, stepping slightly into her path. "I said I have it handled." Grace's lips pressed into a thin line. She stepped back, though her eyes lingered on me, a flicker of quiet apology in them. Across the aisle, the businessman in the charcoal suit cleared his throat. "Maybe it wouldn't hurt to check the list," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Would save everyone some trouble." Lauren turned on him, the smile she reserved for certain passengers replaced by something colder. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I assure you, this is a matter of protocol." He leaned back slightly, folding his arms. "From where I'm sitting, it looks like a matter of assumption." A ripple of murmurs moved through the cabin. The socialite, still clutching her pearls, glanced away as though she suddenly found the window view more interesting. I adjusted the cuff of my blazer, the movement slow, deliberate. "You really don't want to keep this going," I said, not raising my voice but letting the words settle between us. Lauren's chin lifted. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning," I replied. For a heartbeat, the aisle felt like a standoff, her authority against my patience. She broke first. "If you're determined to make this difficult, I can have you escorted to your proper seat before we leave the ground." "Call whoever you need to," I said again, my eyes never leaving hers. Grace shifted behind her, the manifest still in her hands. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it when Lauren's glare cut her off. The businessman shook his head slowly, muttering just loud enough for me to hear, "Unbelievable." Lauren stepped back, but I could see the flush of irritation on her neck as she turned away. The conversation around us began to stir again, though it carried a new undercurrent, curiosity. I sat exactly where I was, hands still, posture unshaken. The first warning had been given. Whether she chose to listen was up to her. Lauren returned to the aisle with a tray balanced perfectly in her hands, crystal glasses of water catching the light. She began serving from the front, moving down the rows. The Raymonds were first, their glasses placed gently on linen napkins with a warm, "Here you go." She worked her way back, stopping at each passenger. When she reached my row, she didn't even glance at me. She stepped around, leaning to hand a glass to the businessman behind me, then continued down the aisle without pause. I watched her move away, the tray growing lighter. My throat was dry, but my patience was steady. I waited until she passed again on her return trip. "Excuse me," I said, my voice soft. "Could I have some water, please?" She stopped, one hand still gripping the tray. "I'll get to you when I can," she replied, curt and dismissive, before moving on. The businessman behind me lowered his glass and shook his head. I caught the small motion in the reflection of the brass trim near my seat. Minutes passed. I adjusted in my seat, stretching one leg slightly into the aisle, not far, just enough to ease the stiffness in my knee. Lauren returned, her steps quick. She didn't ask me to move my leg. Instead, she veered sharply. The edge of her shoe struck my shin, and the tray jolted. In a blink, the glasses tipped and cold water splashed across my lap, dripping onto the carpet. Her gasp was exaggerated, her voice rising. "Watch where you put your legs. Now look at the mess you've caused." Several heads turned. The businessman's brows shot up. Even the socialite, who had been pretending not to watch, leaned in with interest. I looked down at the water soaking through my slacks, then back up at her. "You walked into my leg," I said, calm and clear. She pressed her lips together, tilting her head in mock disbelief. "If you'd stayed in your space, this wouldn't have happened." I brushed at my lap with a napkin. "All I've asked is to be treated with the same respect as everyone else," I said, not raising my voice. "If that's too much to ask, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." A quiet ripple of reaction moved through the cabin. The businessman gave a short, approving nod. Grace, standing a few rows back, froze in place as if holding her breath. Lauren's face darkened, her grip on the tray tightening. "You think you can talk to me like that?" she hissed, stepping closer. I didn't flinch. I met her eyes and spoke evenly. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." Her fingers twitched around the tray. For the first time, I saw the faintest flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Her breathing was sharper now. I could hear it over the low hum of the engines. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the tray still in her hands like a shield she didn't know how to use. Then, without a word of warning, she raised her hand and struck me across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin, sharp, undeniable. It was the kind of sound that freezes everything in its path. Gasps erupted from every direction. The Raymond stopped mid-sip. The businessman behind me pushed halfway out of his seat, eyes wide with disbelief. Grace's hand flew to her mouth, her fingers pressing against trembling lips. The sting bloomed across my cheek, but I didn't lift a hand to touch it. I didn't lean back, I didn't look away. I kept my eyes on her. No anger, no tears, no raised voice. That seemed to unnerve her more than if I'd shouted. She shifted again, this time taking a small step back as if my stillness had become something she couldn't measure. The whispers began, low, scattered. I caught fragments. "She hit her. Is she allowed to do that?" Someone called the captain. Lauren's voice broke through, too loud for the space. "You've been disruptive since you stepped on this plane. Maybe now you'll understand there are rules." Her words rolled over me like water over stone. I let the silence linger before I spoke. "You've crossed the line." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement, solid and final. Her jaw tightened. "You think I'm afraid of you?" I tilted my head slightly. "Not yet." A murmur ran through the passengers. The businessman's eyes narrowed, studying me the way one studies a card player who's holding something powerful close to the chest. Grace shifted in the aisle, her gaze darting from me to Lauren. I could see the battle in her, loyalty to her job clashing with the knowledge that what she'd just witnessed could end careers. Lauren's hand twitched at her side. Her confidence, the one she'd worn like armor since the boarding gate, didn't shine as brightly now. She'd shown too much, too fast, and she knew it. For the first time since I'd taken my seat, I saw something different in her eyes. Not authority, not disdain, but the first thin thread of unease. I didn't look away. I didn't give her an inch. "You've just made a decision you can't take back." The businessman leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "You might want to walk away now." She didn't move. Not yet. But she blinked, and in that blink, I knew she'd felt it. The shift. Over the years, I'd learned something most people never figure out. You don't have to raise your voice to win. Fighting in public might feed someone else's pride, but silence leaves them wondering what you're planning. And wondering is far more dangerous. I reached into my bag without hurry, unlocked my phone, and typed a short message. The tap of my fingers was slow, deliberate. Lauren was still standing there, and I made no effort to hide what I was doing. When I was done, I set the phone face down on the armrest, my hand resting lightly on top. I didn't offer an explanation. Let her imagination work harder than I ever could. Her eyes flicked to the phone, then back to my face. "Texting someone isn't going to change the rules," she said, her voice tighter now. I didn't reply. Grace appeared from the rear of the cabin, her steps careful. She glanced at me, then at Lauren, as if weighing the risk of speaking up. Without a word, she slipped toward the front galley, phone in hand. Her head was bent slightly, her lips moving in a quiet rush to someone on the other end of the line. Lauren noticed, straightened her shoulders, and called after her. "Grace, where are you going?" Grace didn't answer. She disappeared behind the galley curtain. The air in the cabin felt different now. The passengers who'd been whispering before were no longer hiding it. Their eyes tracked Lauren, not me. The businessman was openly watching her, his arms folded. The Raymonds sat stiffly, their champagne untouched. Even the socialite in pearls had turned in her seat, her expression unreadable. Lauren must have felt it because she shifted tactics. She smoothed her uniform jacket, pasted on a smile, and addressed the cabin with a voice that was meant to sound calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please make yourselves comfortable. We'll be departing shortly." No one responded. Not a nod. Not a polite smile. She moved down the aisle, straightening already straight headrests, adjusting trays that didn't need adjusting. It was busy work, but I could see it for what it was, an attempt to show she was still in control. When she passed me, I didn't move, didn't look up. My hand still rested on my phone. The quiet between us was heavier than anything she could have said. Grace returned, walking with the kind of composure people use when they've just made a choice they can't undo. She didn't look at Lauren. Instead, she stepped into the jump seat near the galley, buckled in, and stared straight ahead. Lauren paused halfway down the aisle, her hand tightening on the back of a seat. She glanced around, maybe hoping to find some support in the faces around her, but none came. And still, I said nothing. Because sometimes the most effective move is letting the other person realize they've already lost. From my seat, I could see the shift happening, almost like a tide changing direction. The same socialite who had whispered about me earlier now leaned toward her friend again, but this time her voice was lower, her expression edged with disbelief. "I think she might actually be in the right seat," she murmured, glancing my way before quickly looking down at her lap. Her friend raised her brows, then gave a small shrug, the kind people give when they're no longer sure they want to be on the side they started on. The businessman behind me leaned forward just enough for his words to reach Lauren as she passed. "You're going too far," he said quietly, but there was nothing casual in his tone. Lauren's step faltered. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice still laced with authority, though it didn't carry as much weight as before. "You heard me," he replied, his eyes steady on hers. "This doesn't look like protocol anymore." She straightened, forcing a smile she didn't feel. The smile reminded me of the way people rearrange a tablecloth to hide a stain. The problem's still there, but they hope no one looks too closely. Turning toward me, she softened her voice. "Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. I apologize if my tone earlier came across as harsh. It was the kind of apology that wasn't meant to be believed, the kind meant to control the damage, not repair it." I looked at her, my hands still folded in my lap. "You're apologizing for your tone?" I asked, the question gentle but steady. Her lips tightened. "I'm saying I didn't intend for this to become a bigger issue." I didn't respond. The businessman's quiet chuckle broke the silence behind me. The socialite kept her eyes forward, pretending to read the in-flight magazine, though I could see the page hadn't turned in several minutes. The mood had changed. It wasn't just that people had doubts, it was that they were watching her differently now. Every move she made seemed to be measured, weighed against what they'd already seen. Lauren's gaze moved from face to face in the cabin, but the warmth she'd once gotten from them was gone. And as she stood there, I could tell she knew it. It was no longer about whether she thought I belonged here. It was about the fact that in everyone else's eyes, she was losing her grip on the room. The engines had been humming steadily, the faint vibration underfoot telling me we were taxiing toward the runway. Then, without warning, it stopped. The sudden stillness made heads lift and eyes meet across the cabin. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Lauren glance toward the galley, her brows drawing together. Moments later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. calm but carrying an edge of formality. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received special instructions from ground control. We'll be holding position for a short while before departure. Thank you for your patience." The words landed differently depending on where you were sitting. Most passengers just shifted in their seats, curious. But for Lauren, I saw it in the way her shoulders stiffened, a flicker of something uneasy in her expression. She scanned the aisle as if trying to piece together what special instructions could possibly mean. Her eyes paused on me for half a second longer than necessary. I didn't give her anything back. From the front galley, Grace reappeared. Her steps were slower now, measured, as though she already knew she no longer had to rush. She walked past Lauren without a word, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet satisfaction that didn't need to be explained. Lauren caught it. "Is there something I should know about?" she asked under her breath as Grace passed. Grace didn't stop moving. "Not from me," she replied, her tone polite, but just far enough from obedient to make Lauren blink. The businessman shifted in his seat behind me, leaning toward the aisle to watch. Even the socialite in pearls was now fully engaged, her magazine abandoned on the tray table. Lauren adjusted her jacket, the move too quick to be casual. She straightened, glanced toward the cockpit door, then back to the cabin, as though she could read the situation from faces alone. But the faces weren't helping her anymore. If anything, they were telling her exactly what she didn't want to hear. She'd lost the room. I kept my eyes forward, hands resting on my lap. The pause in motion wasn't an inconvenience for me. It was a signal. Lauren looked at me once more, the faint crease between her brows deepening. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Whatever control she thought she had when we boarded was slipping, and she could feel it. And that was before the real conversation even began. The cockpit door opened with a quiet click, and the captain stepped into the aisle. His presence shifted the cabin in an instant. Conversations hushed, and even Lauren straightened at attention. But he didn't look at her first. He walked directly to my seat. "Ma'am," he began, his tone respectful in a way that didn't match the way Lauren had been speaking to me all afternoon. "We've had a request from ground control to check in with you personally. Would you like to continue this flight, or would you prefer we make alternative arrangements?" A murmur rippled through the passengers. Someone muttered, "Check in with her," another whispered, "Why is he asking her?" From beside me, I could feel Lauren's stare burning into the side of my face. She stepped forward quickly. "Captain, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. This passenger..." The captain lifted a hand without looking at her. An unspoken request for silence. "The question is for her." Lauren's mouth opened, then closed again. Her confusion was almost tangible. She glanced between the captain and me, as if trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. I looked up at him, meeting his steady gaze. "I'll continue," I said. "Very well," he replied, giving a short nod. "We'll make the necessary adjustments." He stepped back toward the cockpit, but not before giving Lauren a glance, one she couldn't quite interpret, though it made her shift uncomfortably on her feet. As he disappeared behind the door, Lauren turned to me. "What exactly is going on here?" I didn't answer. Her voice dropped lower. "Why is he talking to you like that?" The businessman leaned out from behind me, a small smirk on his face. "Maybe you're about to find out," he said. Lauren's eyes flicked to him, then back to me, but I was already reaching down to smooth the crease in my blazer. My movements were unhurried, intentional, the kind of pace that tells everyone watching that you're not on their clock. I rose from my seat, letting the aisle clear just enough for the passengers ahead to turn and see. The Raymonds looked up. The socialite's lips parted slightly, as though she'd just connected a thought she wasn't ready to speak aloud. I adjusted my bag on the seat, took one last glance at Lauren, and said, "Let's make this quick." The aisle seemed to part without a word. Passengers leaned back slightly as I walked forward, each step steady, unhurried. The captain stood near the front, his posture respectful, as though waiting for me to take my place. I turned to face the cabin. Rows of expectant faces stared back, curiosity in some, guilt in others. My eyes finally settled on Lauren. Her shoulders were squared, but the color had drained from her face. "I think it's time I introduce myself," I began, my voice calm but carrying to the very back of the plane. I am the sole owner of this airline. The reaction was instant. A murmur swelled, passengers exchanging wide-eyed glances. The businessman's smirk grew into a slow nod. Even the socialite's lips parted, her earlier arrogance replaced with something closer to shock. Lauren's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I built this company from nothing, I continued, letting my gaze sweep the cabin. One route, one plane, one passenger at a time. And I built it with one promise, that every single person who steps on board will be treated with respect, no matter who they are or where they come from. The Raymonds shifted in their seats, Mrs. Law, Raymond's knitting needles pausing mid-stitch. Grace, still in the jump seat, sat taller now, her eyes fixed on me with quiet pride. I've watched the way some people are treated when others assume they don't belong, I said, my tone steady but edged with steel. That assumption has no place here, not in my company, not on my planes. My attention returned to Lauren. What I've seen today is exactly what I promised would never happen under my name. She swallowed, her hands clasping together tightly. I raised a hand slightly, not to silence her with force, but to make it clear I wasn't done. This isn't about you having a bad day. This is about choosing to see someone as less, based on nothing but your own prejudice. And that choice, on my aircraft, is unacceptable. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the engines. The power in the room had shifted completely, and everyone knew it. I glanced toward the captain, then back to the passengers. We will continue this flight, but changes are about to be made before we take off. Lauren's eyes dropped to the floor, her authority gone, replaced by the heavy weight of knowing she'd crossed the one person she couldn't afford to. The captain gave a brief nod toward the open door. Two ground staff in dark uniforms stepped inside, their expressions neutral but purposeful. "Miss Lauren," the captain said, his tone formal now, "you'll be disembarking before we depart." The color drained further from her face. "You can't be serious. This is not up for discussion," he replied. The staff moved down the aisle. Passengers shifted to make room, eyes tracking every step. Lauren tried to hold her posture, but her hands twisted together, betraying her. She glanced around the cabin, searching for an ally, but the faces that met hers held no sympathy. When she reached me, she paused. "I didn't mean." I met her gaze. "You did." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, she turned and followed the staff toward the open door. The moment her heels crossed the threshold, a quiet round of applause began at the back of the plane and spread forward. It wasn't loud or mocking. It was the kind of applause that comes when justice feels like it's finally been seen. Grace stood from the jump seat as the captain returned into the cockpit. I stepped toward her. "Thank you," I said softly, "for having the courage to make that call." She shook her head. "I just couldn't watch it happen and do nothing." "You didn't just do something," I told her. "You showed exactly what this airline should stand for." Her eyes widened when I added, "I'll be speaking with HR when we land. There's a supervisor position in need of someone like you." Her hand flew to her mouth. Not in shock this time, but in disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered. As I moved back toward my seat, the businessman rose halfway, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his expression sincere. "It's been an honor to watch that," he said. "You handled it better than most would have." I smiled faintly. That's the thing about real power. You don't have to use volume to make it heard. The cabin felt lighter now. Passengers settled in again, though their eyes still lingered on me, as though they were trying to fit the pieces of the story together. We were ready to fly, but for me, the real journey had just begun. As the engines roared back to life, and we began our second taxi toward the runway, I let my head rest against the seat. My cheek still carried the faint sting from earlier, but it wasn't the kind of pain worth dwelling on. I'd stayed calm for a reason. Real power doesn't need to shout, and it doesn't need to prove itself in the heat of the moment. It speaks in decisions that echo long after the room, or the cabin, goes quiet. Lauren's removal wasn't just about what she did to me. It was about what she represented. The subtle, constant erosion of dignity when people decide they can treat someone as less because of who they think they are. I'd built my company to be the opposite of that. Today proved we weren't there yet. By the time we landed, my mind was already on the next step. In the quiet of my office that evening, I drafted a new directive. It was short, but it carried the weight of the entire company behind it. Effective immediately, any employee, regardless of position, found engaging in discriminatory treatment toward passengers or colleagues will be terminated. There will be no warnings, no second chances. I didn't stop there. The memo also required every staff member, from pilots to gate agents, to complete in-person training designed not just to manage bias, but to dismantle it. When I hit send, the message went out to every inbox across the airline. My assistant later told me the responses started pouring in within minutes, some shocked, some proud, all of them aware that the rules had changed. It wasn't about creating fear. It was about making sure that what happened to me in that cabin wouldn't happen to anyone else. Not in my company. Not on my watch. Looking out at the city skyline from my window, I felt the same calm I'd carried on the plane. The kind of calm that doesn't come from winning an argument, but from knowing you've changed the ending for everyone who comes after you. They thought they were putting me in my place. Instead, they reminded me of mine. Not a seat number. Not a title printed on a boarding pass. But the place I'd worked my entire life to reach. The one built on integrity, persistence, and the refusal to let anyone decide my worth for me. As the plane settled into its flight, I glanced around the cabin. The businessman caught my eye and gave a small nod. The Raymonds offered a polite smile. Even the socialite, who had been so quick to judge at first, looked away with something almost like respect. But it was Grace I kept thinking about. Quiet courage doesn't get headlines, but it changes everything. She hadn't shouted, hadn't made a scene, yet she had taken a risk to do the right thing. That's the kind of strength I want leading this airline forward. I thought, too, about the passengers who said nothing but saw everything. The ones who will remember the way the tide shifted the moment dignity stood its ground. We landed without further incident, but I knew this day would travel far beyond that runway. Stories like this always do. They get told over dinner tables, in group chats, and in quiet moments when someone asks, "Have you ever seen something like that happen?" If you've ever been underestimated, you know the feeling. If you've ever had someone decide who you were before you opened your mouth, you know the weight of it. And if you've stood your ground and refused to let them shrink you, then you know it's not just about winning the moment. It's about reclaiming the space that was always yours. I'd like to hear your story. Share in the comments if you've ever been misjudged or underestimated and how you handled it. And tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this message travels. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you that respect should never be conditional, then please like this video and subscribe. I share my stories here every week, not because they're easy to tell, but because they matter. Because somewhere, someone else is being told they don't belong. And maybe, just maybe, hearing this will give them the courage to stay in their seats.